Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. Today is the 5th day of January 2020. I'm sorry, 2021. And my talk today is going to be how things connect in history. Most people have very little idea what history is about. Some people think it's contrived, but in some ways it's connected, and it's connected to what something happened in the past reappears later. And so, as a child, I can remember being caught up in what I call some of the first books I read was about the Civil War that took place here in the United States in the 1860s. I had an enormous passion to find out more about that as a child, and even though I didn't have a lot of resources, I had books that I read and remember the statistics. As I remember how many troops there were in the battles and this and that, and was enthralled with that. And so my passion has always been simply is to try to figure things out. I have a passion for history. I have a passion for truth in so many ways. Naturally, I'm a poli sci major in college, also a minor in history, and then also went on to seminary. And interest was in church history because I want to know. I want to know why things happen. Not because simply is that my so-called president or so-called leaders tell me to go fight a war because there are communists over there in Vietnam. You see, this is how they manipulate you. And if you don't know your history, you don't understand how these things work, you get played, and you get played many times. And the problem simply is that no one learns anything from it because it's basically it's a history that is. And I remember simply even being in seminary, they would use that word history as being, they would capitalize HIS as being his story. That God had something to do with that. I don't know if I agree with that particular perspective, but I just simply have a passion about history and always long and actually read books on dealing with these things. And what we call books that are basically, not popular. You've got people who write books that just give a synopsis of what takes place, and it seems to skim right over things. So let me explain something. This is going to deal with the whole history of how the communists took power and how the Nazis took power. And it has a lot to do with the United States, enormously a lot to do with the United States, and how we got involved. And so let's begin first at where we would call those who the Bolsheviks, the Mensheviks. Those, and I studied. Let me point out something else. I studied German history and Russian history, both both classes I studied in college, and I still had a professor who was an excellent professor who was hard as could be. If you try to get an A, very few students made A's in his class. He was a tough professor, but I loved him to death because he was just a great professor. He knew how to teach. And we're talking about a class of maybe 15 to 20 people in his class. Unlike going to a major university, you wouldn't even have the professor. You would have some other guy teaching who simply probably is more. Most professors today in major colleges don't even teach. They just write books. That's what they do. And there's a place for that. I understand that. So, what transpired? What caused the whole issue with the communists coming to power? Well, I'll quote something for you. It's pretty important. Franklin Delano Roosevelt made a comment. He says, "Nothing happens by accident. It always is planned this way." And it is. It's always planned. So let's go back to the power that took place in Russia and what took place here in America during the Civil War, because it's connected. It's very much connected. You see, Lincoln was involved in a war with the South. The South itself was far more economically richer than the North, and it had enough of what we call what was going on with the issues um, with the people up north. In the South, we call them Yankees. And so what transpires is simply this. They decided to secede, and rightfully so, because they were the states. The states created the union, not the other way around. Never has been and never will be. You've been lied to if anyone tells you otherwise. The states created the union, not the United States. Not the union created it. There was no power at that time in Washington whatsoever. Power came from the states. The Confederation, that is the Article of Confederation, speaks of that immensely. There's no central power there at all. So what transpires simply is this. In Lincoln's day, simply is that he was trying to supposedly trying to unite the South back into the North, because the South was the South was well off. Now, I'm not saying I agree with what they did. That's not the point. The point is, I'm just giving you facts. The South had their money in the banks in the North, and they decided to pull their money out of the banks. And he also decided to basically to secede from the Union. And that was a rightful decision by John Calhoun, who spoke about these things. Plus, most people are unaware that the state of Massachusetts decided to secede back in the early 1800s because something they didn't agree with. We'll get into that sometime later. So when things were threatened, and there was a lot of pressure being put upon Lincoln, again, I don't agree with what he did, but here's the key. The British were in Canada and were licking their chops, and the French were in Mexico licking their chops, because what they wanted to do was simply to separate and divide the United States for themselves. That's a fact. No one will tell you that, but that's the facts, folks. And you need to wake up, you see. And so Lincoln, under enormous pressure, there was pressure for him to borrow money from the Rothschilds. He did not do that. He decided to create his own greenbacks money. He also did what we call the income tax, which I'm not in agreement with. But he was under enormous pressure, and he asked for the Russians for help. And the Russians did provide help. The Russians sent a navy here. They sent the navy on the West Coast and the East Coast. And basically what they were saying simply is, if you decide to split this country up, then you're going to have Russia to deal with also. So this kept the British and the French from actually dividing the country into two. That's the facts, folks. They don't tell you that stuff in college or even school. You see, most of you are unaware of what goes on because you don't even want to know. The reason why things are like they are, and I'm just going to say it like it is, folks. You don't care. You just don't care. And that's why things get worse and worse, because you are putting out, simply your spirit is putting out, you don't care about things, about anything. And that's why things get worse. It's your energy. And when you don't care, this is what happens. And I feel many times as though I'm someone who has to stand on the ledger here and speak straightforward to people, honestly, to tell them the truth. Because most think they know something. They don't know shit. They don't know shit. And that's why I'm angry, because people put out stuff about certain things and they don't know what they're talking about. They just put out a spiel that someone else puts out. They don't check the facts. They don't look into things. They don't look. They don't study. So what transpired, simply the Russians saved the United States in many ways. So what happened was William Seward, we would call it Seward's folly, according to them, the United States decided to, quote unquote, to pay the Russians back. Well, how could they do that? They can't exactly go out and say, here, let's get some money from the Congress and such and produce money and give it back to them and pay it. No, they can't do that, folks. So what they did decide to do, they say, we'll buy Alaska. We'll buy Alaska for you. We'll buy Alaska and give you the money, in exchange for that part of the land that you own. And so that's what happened. Those who ruled the world and wanted this to actually split the United States never forgave Russia for that. Never. And when they got their chance to do it, they did it. And part of that has to do with the situation that takes place with Serbia. And Serbia simply is a linchpin that actually starts everything happening in the First World War. You see, Serbia was actually under rule of Austria-Hungarian Empire, main player, and Serbia's friend was actually the Russians. And so what transpired was simply this. Austrian-Hungarian people got upset because they killed the Archduke and his wife. So they're going to have war. But there are treaties signed all over the place defending who. So there are certain countries that have decided if so-and-so goes to war, we will defend them, which is the biggest asinine thing in the world to do. That's why treaties are such a mess. So what transpires simply is that Serbia is at war with Austria-Hungary. Austria doesn't realize it at that time that simply Serbia is asking for help from Russia, and Russia says, no, we'll step in for you. So now Russia is going to fight Austria-Hungary. So it's a bigger boy. It's a bigger boy on the block now. And so the Austrian Hungarians ask for help from Germany. Germany doesn't want this. They don't want this whole situation at all. Not at all. Period. Don't want it at all. Nothing. But that's what happens is they get in the war. And so what happens, this is 1914. And the war is going on. And this is how the communists get in power. The United States is involved immensely in getting the communists involved. Because what transpires simply is industrialists and bankers and President Yeltsin is involved, tremendously involved in getting the Bolsheviks into power in Russia. And so what transpires simply is that Trotsky, who lived in New York City, was sent across the ocean. Lenin, who's in Switzerland, had already gotten thrown out before in Russia, the revolution before. There was a revolution that took place in 1905 in Russia. There was a revolution that took place in 1908 in Russia. And eventually the major revolution, to bring it all down, was in 1917. And it almost failed again. So what transpires is simply Switzerland, that is, Germany says, yeah, we'll work with you. We don't want the Eastern Front. We don't want to fight them anymore. We've got Eastern and Western Front fighting here. It's just so simple. People understood that we don't want to fight two fronts here. So tell you what, you can bring Lenin from Switzerland and bring him through our country, and we'll protect him. And so that's what happened. He was given money, a ton of money, when he got to, I think it's Finland or Sweden. Millions and millions of dollars he was given. Trotsky, with his quote-unquote entourage, over 300 people who were actually communists from New York City. The United States knew all this. Woodrow Wilson knew this too. They knew this. They allowed it to happen. So their bankers are involved. They give millions and millions of dollars to the communist movement. Why would they do that? Because they can make money off wars, you see. They make money off both sides. That means the East, that is Russia, they make money off them. They make money off of Britain, France, Germany, the United States when they enter that, because countries have to borrow money from the bankers, and that's how they win it. They don't care who wins the wars. All they care about is simply is profits. So what transpires simply is this. They are given money and support not only from the Red Cross. The American Red Cross is involved also in Russia. The Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks simply the Bolsheviks means majority party, Mensheviks means the minority party. They'd already failed a couple times, and the third time simply was the charm. They chose to do it in November, and it succeeded. Most are unaware. Most are unaware that what happened was simply is that when the communists did take over, the government building in St. Petersburg was empty. You hear me? Empty. There was no one there hardly to cause any problems. It was already vacant. Kerensky, who was the moderate of the deal, that is, he was actually had a moderate government, was thrown out. He allowed what we call to get other dissatisfied people before the Bolsheviks take over. What he does, he allows the prison doors to become open, and he allows these communists and social synthesizers to go along with it, so that would be supportive when this all comes down. So Kerensky is eventually no longer involved in power, and the government is what we call the Duma. It fails, and there's a vacuum of power. And so what transpires simply is that the Bolsheviks take over. Trotsky is involved with the Mitsovich. Most people are not aware of that. The leader of the Bolsheviks was Lenin. Now, there are people in high places that supported this whole movement. Are you aware that Henry Ford was involved in this? Are you aware of all the bankers were involved in it? The Rockefellers, the Mellons, whoever else are involved, industrialists wanted this to happen. And you say to yourself, why would they want this to happen? You see, because a lot of it is, it doesn't make any sense because they're here in America and they're successful. Well, most of these people are so successful, they don't even know what to do with their money. They want to cause disruptions elsewhere. Part of the key is that most we're not aware of is also that the discovery of oil in the Baku oil fields in southern Russia. This gives the opportunity for the Rothschilds and Rockefeller to get involved with the oil fields. And Wilson is involved with this and allows it to happen. Woodrow Wilson, that's right. That president that I really hate of what he did to us Americans. So what transpires simply is that it's about money and oil. And then you simply is that Lyndon would be in power. Most politicians do things for wrong reason, folks. Most of it's to do with money and power. Okay. So they will do certain things as long as they're kept in power, and whatever happens over here is okay. They turn a blind eye to it. So that's what happened with Lyndon. Most are not aware of what transpires in a few years with the Bolsheviks in order. In fact, they actually have a election in Russia. After the Bolsheviks come to power, they have an election. Are you aware that the communists were defeated? They were defeated, the Bolsheviks. The people were against it. That didn't mean that they got out of power, but Trotsky decided let's have a free election and let's see what the people think. And you know what? The people didn't want it. But guess what? They were in power, the Bolsheviks, and they decided, who cares? We're going to do this. It tells you something that how ruthless these people were. And these people were just, they didn't care about anything. They just wanted to rule over man. You got to ask yourself this very critical question. Critical. Why do certain men treat other men like dogs? Like slaves? What causes men to do this? What causes a man to want to be so evil that he would do damage to his own brothers and sisters? His own brothers. You see. What's wrong here is the heart. There's no heart there with people, you see. And this has to happen at an early age too, I think. We know that Churchill had issues, which we'll deal with him too. We're going to do a series on Churchill, explain what he's all about too. He's not such a great person neither, people. You've been told lies about him too. So back to the whole situation. There is, not only did they not succeed in the election, they're still in power. And then what happens simply is, to make things really just kind of wears you on here, the U.S. and Britain are involved now in a civil war in the Soviet Union. That's right. We're going to go over there and save Russia. Now you talk about a PR program. That's a PR program. That's a form of propaganda that's saying we're going to defeat these people, such and such. So the United States Marines over there, they get defeated easily because they're not there to win a battle. They're not there to win a war. It's all to save face. It's all to look good in the papers. The United States is over there fighting for freedom. They don't want it to happen anyway because the Rockefeller's involved and the Rothschilds are involved because simply it's the Baku oil fields. They want to make money, and this is the way to do it. This would not have happened, probably. The sad fact simply is that the Tsar is part of this. What do I mean by that? The Tsar actually wanted these oil fields to be explored, and he looked for outside people to do this. So it's not the Bolsheviks that did this. The Tsar was that. And the strange thing about the Tsar simply is he was probably one of the richest men in the world at that time. And this blows me away because I read this probably a month or two ago. Is that he put his money in Switzerland before he advocated and the money into the banks here in America, thinking that would save his face. He knew that basically the whole thing was going to come apart already, and he decided that he was going to transfer that money into those banks. And he was wrong, you see. So let's continue on. So the Russian Civil War is passed between the Reds, which are the communists, the Bolsheviks, and the Whites who seek to have the Tsar come back in power. The Whites, Russia is the Soviet Union is a huge, huge country to actually attack. If you got armed forces such and such, it's almost impossible task in a lot of ways because simply there's so much land in the Soviet Union. And you would have to fight usually in the wintertime eventually, because the winters there are but they are hard on mechanized armor and people. And with the secession, simply Trotsky took lead. He is actually the military leader of the Civil War for the Soviet Union. And in 1924, if I remember my history, Lenin dies a tragic death. And there's a power vacuum in the Bolsheviks. Most assumed that Trotsky would take power, but there's another comer named Stalin who gets involved, and he has already made his move. He's already made his decision. He has the people already supporting his Politburo, and he takes power. And Trotsky and him have their words, and eventually Trotsky has to leave because he is no longer in favor of what Stalin's about. I don't know if that means that Trotsky's a nice guy. I doubt that. It's just simply is that he was a loser of taking the power. So with this taking place after Lenin, Stalin decides simply is that let's do something. Let's sell Russian wheat. We can do that to support the country. Now you got to understand there's no way of making money here because a lot of the investors in Russia are gone. They leave, or either they're destitute. So there's no money to invest into building things up. There isn't. It's all about the Bolsheviks' power. And so what they do is they sell their wheat to export it. They sell their wheat to get money. And what happens simply is then that with that simply is now Russians are going hungry. You got to understand this, folks. This is really serious. People are starting to starve. Never mind. Stalin decides to take over, goes in Ukraine, which is a huge breadbasket of the Soviet Union, and he steals everything from those people. The Ukrainians are treated like dirt. He goes in and steals all their wheat. He steals their animals, their pigs, their cows, all of it's taken over for the motherland. And while this is happening, simply is that I failed to tell you that the soldiers come back on the Eastern front, to quote unquote, they didn't want to fight anymore. They're tired of fighting. And so there's no longer an Eastern front for the Germans to defend. And Adolf Hitler talks about his memoirs or his what takes place in the war, the battles that takes place, and he blames the Jews for this. He blames also the media who produce negative, and he also is upset with what I call the military leaders who eventually give in. And so now, when eventually Germany doesn't succeed in winning on the Western Front, there's an issue in Germany that's coming apart. You see, so both these countries are now, they were fighting each other. Okay, and Britain and French began to lay down the Treaty of Versailles, which is a dirty, dirty treaty, just outright ridiculous what they did. Which all they did was simply is it's got purpose behind it, is to build up animosity, hatred, and eventually have someone arise in power to, like Hitler, to become a dictator. These things don't happen by accident. They just don't. So with the situation with the Ukrainians back in Russia, the Soviet Union, they have confiscated these people. Most people are unaware, probably 8 million people died of starvation in Ukraine, if not more. This is a true story. And it's really so sad. It's what's happened simply is even in 2014, as I talk about with a friend I had in Ukraine, trying to convince them that simply as the United States was not helping them out in the overthrow of a legitimate government to put someone else in power, which is part of the Orange Revolution. The United States does this all over the place, folks. They just do this. They just come in and buy people off and use them to benefit themselves and put their person in power. And that's what's in Ukraine now. Ukraine is a broke country, completely broke, you see. Because those there, the leader there, he benefits off this, such and such. And this is what happens. This is how, people are hurt. And then why people are hurting in Ukraine. You don't hear anything hardly anymore from Ukraine because it's hush-hush now. But that's to explain what happened. So what happened simply is these people were destitute, Ukraine, in the 1920s. These people died of starvation. Millions and millions of people starved. All because of Stalin selling the wheat to export it to get money to build military hardware and to continue the government there in the Soviet Union. I'm going to remark something here very clearly. The communist system never works and never will work. Because the problem with the communists is simply this. They destroy everything that actually would build up a society to keep it going. Like the dumbest thing in the world. That's what they do. Because it's part of the program. They promise all kinds of things for their people, and it's all lies. Every damn one of them. You see. And so what transpires is simply is those people starve. And so we turn our eyes towards Germany. And von Papen, who's the leader of the Germany after the humiliating defeat for the Germans, takes over, and he stands hardly no chance at all of holding the power, and he doesn't. He's a puppet in a lot of regards. And we know that Hindenburg was there, but Hindenburg's an older man at this point. And actually, the elections eventually in the 1933 elections was that Hitler actually did not win the election. He finished second. Hindenburg won the election. But Hitler persuaded Hindenburg to step down. He would be the chancellor of Germany. And so, with that taking place, the United States is already, again, the bankers and the industrialists are already supporting Hitler, you see. This is why we see this fast growth that takes place in Germany in the 1930s, when the country's almost, let's just go back and go into during the Depression. And we'll talk about some key figures here as I continue on. The two key figures we'll talk about a little later here is Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Martin Niemöller, who are eventually the ones who are what we call the confessing church, which is actually not a part of Luther's church, not a part of the Catholic Church, and not a part of the Reformed Church. They were a very small minority, and they were fighting against Hitler to be in power. And we'll talk about these two because they're key figures, very key figures, that most people don't know about. Okay. So Hitler's granted all this money to build up his country. And all these treaties, the Treaty of Versailles, basically to keep the military from such and such being built up, was gradually weeded down. And most people are not aware of this. The French were getting all kinds of things from the Germans. The British were, all during the World War I. We had to pay back everything, such and such. And then Germany had to rebuild itself in many ways. And I'm not taking any sides here. That's not the point here. I'm explaining to you basically the whole issue. Well, I am taking sides because basically I think the United States, if it hadn't been for the United States, none of this would have succeeded. None of it would have. It wouldn't have. The bankers are the ones who actually destroy countries. They always do. And the lawyers come along with them and just write laws in order to protect them. You see. So what transpires simply is this, is that we have Henry Ford, again, giving money. We have other men that are involved in the steel industry, industrialists here in America who have made their money, are living well, and yet they got to participate and destroy someone else. They have to destroy somebody else. They can't keep their hands off of some other country. They've already been blessed here in this country tremendously, have everything in the world they can have, and yet they continue to rot hatred. You see. So what transpires here is Hitler comes to power, is in power, gradually becomes bigger, and we start simply seeing he building an Autobahn. They're already now building cars, all this. Well, actually, where did the money come from to get this stuff, folks? You got to ask you that question. Because it has to come from somewhere. It can't come from a vacuum. So gradually they're building a military. They're starting to build their airplanes, getting involved in that. And most are not aware that before this time, as I skip back here, the Depression, eventually it got so bad in Germany that the Dutch marks were totally worthless. You need to hear this because this is what's going to happen here in the United States. This is history for you to understand. I'm seeing it clearly. It's as clear as a bell here, folks. The destruction of America. Right before your eyes right now. Is that simply is the money won't be worth anything. They're inflating the money already. You see? And that's what they did in the past simply was the money was totally worthless. So here's what happened. A man would go to work. Say he worked at a plant. Say he works at a steel mill or whatever plant in the coal mines, whatever. You got paid at 12 o'clock. He didn't put his money into the quote unquote banks. He went down to the market to get whatever he could get for what he got paid for. Inflation was so bad that they were paid twice a day. So when he goes back to work and works from 1 to 4 or whatever the hours are, the second time he gets paid, he goes and buys again when the thing inflation has already gone up. More, it costs more and more. That's what inflation is. We also saw a modern experience actually here recently in the country of Zimbabwe, which also occurred in Argentina recently, and it's also occurring in Venezuela. We don't even know what's going on in Venezuela. Everything's been hush hush there. We don't know what's going on. Very little news comes out of Venezuela. You can bet the United States is involved there too. Okay? These are facts. This is not theories. These are facts. Very clear facts. And so what transpires simply here is this. Germany and the Soviet Union, and this is the thing that really bothers me. It really bothers me because it tells me something's weird here. And it sticks in my craw, as I say. Why is the British, the French, and the Americans involved in the war with the Russians? Why is Russia involved at all in the war? Why is the United States allies with a communist power? Those are red flags, folks. We know that simply is that the Stalin sent delegates to Poland. Not Poland, but actually Germany and the Russians and Soviet Union had delegates talked among themselves and said, this is what we're going to do. When things get a little rough, the 39, you take half the country and we take half the country. And so that's what they did. So they had an agreement to the Russians would come to all the way to the half part of the country. They'd already come up with a line and everything where they would have, that would be their part. This has been true of Poland in the past too. If you look at their history, it's how things have happened to them. Okay. And Germany took the other half. You know why? Because there's a history of this already in the past. At one time, Lithuania and Poland were one time the most powerful countries. In fact, they were more of a threat to Russia and also to Germany in the 1700s. But not now. They're not a threat. So they decide simply as, hey, as the war's going on here, let's just come in here and take what we want, and you take the other half. And so there was agreement. There was an agreement to do this. It's amazing that, these are things that simply just, like, wait a minute here, hold on here. Okay. But you have to understand something here. You see, they're socialists. You see, Germany's part socialist. They're national socialists. And communism in some ways is definitely socialism, although to the extreme. And we don't forget about the fascists that are in Italy with Mussolini. You see. All of them have a way of running things, but they're all basically dictatorships. They just work a little bit different. In the Soviet Union, you don't have any land, period. It's owned by the government, period. In Italy, a classic example simply is, you have the factory, you have you work for the factory, such and such, but it all goes to the government. In other words, if you have land and you are got a wine vineyard, whatever you want to call it, yeah, you own it. You own the land, you own the grapes, but what the wine comes through, that goes to the state. So you don't get anything out of it per se. You get something out of it, it's not because based upon you owning anything, you see. And so what transpires here simply is those governments are put in power. All of them are put in power. All of them. And all of them are dealing with the United States, with the bankers and the industrials to do this. So it's no surprise to me, you see, when I talk about communitarianism, that eventually the capitalists and the communists get together. Part of the Hegelian dialectic, per se, and how this works again. But I've stepped ahead of myself here. So you have to ask yourself, why to the United States? Why to Britain and France? Why do they have a friendship treaty with the Russians? You got to ask yourself why. Why? And the United States gave enormous armaments to the Soviet Union. We gave them tanks. We gave them the ability to build trucks. We gave all this to them for them to fight against Hitler. Same way on the other side, too. Not as much, that is, gave them the technology. The Germans had the technology, they just needed the money. So this is how wars take place. They're all wars are bankers' wars. They always will be. They always have been. Even the war that took place here in America, the American Revolution, was a bankers' war too. They don't give a damn about freedom. Never have. And so we keep going, progressing here. And we have Eisenhower, we have Patton, and we have Alexander, I think it is. I always forget his name, from Britain. They're the three major leaders, but Eisenhower is the key one. Eisenhower continues to stall as the battle is coming from the west to take over Germany. He stalls. He stalls the whole time. Patton is willing, so is Alexander, willing to go. Let's keep moving here. Let's defeat Germany. And Eisenhower is part of the deal, you see. He's part of the deal because he is going to allow the Russians, the Red Army, come all the way into Berlin. And Patton basically is a no nonsense. I would assume he's probably Aries. He just speaks his mind straight out and says it. Look, let's fight the Russians and defeat them too, because they're our enemies too. No, Patton, you were right. They're supposedly our enemies. The sad part simply is that not with Franklin Roosevelt or Truman would defend you on that right. You see. Patton was a go-getter. He wanted to, if we're going to be here, so there's no sense in taking our troops home. Let's keep them here and just build up and fight a war against the Russians. I don't think he understood simply is that the United States was giving enormous technology for the Russians too, for them to build their military up, and then eventually there will be a military power. So what transpires, and which is the sad thing about the whole thing, is that we see this whole thing takes place in Eastern Europe. And by God, it's another filthy thing that happens in war. So the Polish, the Belarusians, the Romanians, the Bulgarians, Hungarians, the Serbians, the Slavs, the Albanians, the Czechs, the Slovaks, are all taken over. They're all taken over by the Soviet Union. And we know that Tito, which is the one who took over and built up what we call Yugoslavia, who basically did work with the Soviets, although he was far more powerful than the other leaders. But they were brutal to these people in Eastern Europe. And the United States allowed that to happen. You see. That was what Patton was talking about simply is, let's get the Russians out. If we defeated Germans now, we're here, let's go ahead and defeat them. Let's go ahead and destroy them. because he understood simply is the power play here was very key for the Soviet Union, was to them to get the Warsaw Pact countries, and that's what they became, the Warsaw Pact. That's why you had the creation of the Cold War. That's why you had the creation of quote unquote what we call the NATO countries pact. So, and you have also the Warsaw countries, the Warsaw Pact. They're actually communists and ruled by dictatorships. There's no what I was saying. So I wish that I wish I knew a lot more people who from those areas. Many don't want to talk about it, and most of them now are passed away. Eventually, the leader who eventually brings us down is Yeltsin. The Russian part comes apart, but I don't. It's not what people think. They claim it was a coup. It was no coup. It was done on. It was planned that way eventually to make the United States the supreme power of the world. See, it's a whole lot easier, and that's the cog, the big cog in the wheel here, folks. You see, the rest of the world is hanging on by a thread, except the Chinese, and the United States is being destroyed right before your eyes. You see, the money is becoming worthless, meaning that it's inflated. It means there is more money being printed or quote unquote done on a computer that is actually makes it worth less. It's no longer tied, as far as I know, with OPEC. OPEC simply is the oil petroleum exporting countries that the United States barter with to protect their oil fields, because the dollar was going to fall then. It was actually falling in 71 and 72, and Nixon had to do something radically different. He was put in between a rock and a hard place, and that's what he did. He took the United States off the gold standard because they were going to take all the gold we had, because the dollar was no longer valuable, so they would take the gold. Well, to be honest with you, they've already taken the gold anyway. Here in the country, there's no gold in Fort Knox. It's all bullshit. You see, somebody else got it. That's the other funny thing. Simply is that the key was see this. So as I continue to share with you here, nothing happens by accident. Never has. The bankers are always plotting to fight another war. They want a war so that they can make money off of it. They don't care anything about lives. These people don't have any souls whatsoever. They are empty and empty completely. They don't have souls. They don't care about other people. They really don't. Where do you get the idea they do care? Because maybe you care, or you think other people are that way. Bankers don't have any souls, folks. They don't. They wouldn't be in that position if they did, you see. They would not do things that they do to destroy other people. What they do is the most unhuman thing you could do to others, you see. It's only those at the very top that do this. And unfortunately, the few that are other bankers are either clueless or they're getting a piece of the pie, you see. So the situation here in the United States simply is that we're seeing a divided country. A divided country can't stand, folks. They never will. And they've done this on purpose. I think part of the purpose simply it's been going on for a long time. And I'll share this with you. Talk radio is probably one of the biggest divider in this country. Those on the right and those on the left. The left is different. They're not exactly always on the right. I mean, they're not on radio, that is, all the time, per se. But there have been those on the left have been basically the war has been lost in a lot of ways because most of the students have been going to colleges for the last 40 years or 50 years, and they hate not hate, but they don't like it. They're actually more left leaning, so they lean more to the left. They're bought off, and those on the right simply are the ones that what I would call they keep appeasing. So basically, they never really actually fight. They claim they're going to fight against this, and they don't. They lie to you every time. That is, and so you can't put your hopes in these people. You really can't. So you need to put your hope only in yourself, and that you have to save your own self. And I pointed this out in my videos: is that you need to grow food. You need to be independent, not dependent upon the system. That means dependent upon the government. So these things are critical, the United States has to fall. Let's swing another thing here. Let's go back to the issue simply is where the United Nations fits in here. You see, Woodrow Wilson, with his 14 points, he didn't write them. Someone else wrote it for him. His whole idea was simply the League of Nations. You know that actually the League of Nations would have seceded for only one reason. The U.S. Congress. Those who'd actually put their money on the United States that would support this were wrong. The Congress says, no, we're not going to be a part of this. And so the League of Nations fell under Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson also eventually had he was a very sick man physically also. He had a stroke. I think the last year or two of his life, basically his wife was basically running part of the government in some ways because he was no longer, he wasn't hardly around anymore. He had a stroke. He did make a remark, he did make a statement. He said, basically, I've destroyed this country. And he did. He followed Colonel Mandrell House, who he trusted as a friend, led him astray because Woodrow Wilson had an issue with himself. He wanted to be seen as successful. This is a problem with most politicians. They've got a real problem with their ego. They feel that they've got to feel like they're some glorious person, and the problem is simply they're blackmailed 99.9999% of the time. They are, especially here in the United States. And so as we keep going down the road here and such, the United States was used in certain ways too. But back to the United Nations, eventually the United Nations is seceded by a big money from Rockefeller, who donates this plot of land in New York City, gives tons of money for it. And I used to belong to the John Birch Society, and one of their big things simply was to get us out of the United Nations. They were big into that. I don't see them as being always the bad guy, but in reality, that's what the John Birch Society was fighting. In the early '60s, they were tremendously involved. They got probably Barry Goldwater to run as a president candidate in 1964. Now he got killed in the election with Lyndon B. Johnson. But Barry Goldwater was probably supported by a lot of the John Birchers. I'm not a John Bircher now. I don't really have anything to do with him, period. But I was at one time involved with him. But it's far more than just the United Nations. The problem with the United Nations that I've always had is simply is that the major powers get one vote. You have countries like Liberia and Togo and Lesotho or whatever else. All these members have one vote too. So when you eventually get all these little countries that vote, you can get them to vote, and their vote is more powerful than your vote. Now, yes, there are what we call the founding members, the charter members, United States, Britain, France, um, Russia, Soviet Union, and China. But they're the ones that actually can bring things up. But anyway, that's another story. I don't want to get into that anyway. So what happened with the this is critical also to understand the situation with the United States after the Soviet Union falls. See, there was a check and balance system with the Soviet Union and Russia, the Soviet Union and America, you see. Now there was just one superpower out there and one superpower gone rogue. And what does that mean? Well, basically, with no power check, the United States decided that it was going to do its thing. And that's part of the reason why the United States has fell so quickly. Is that simply we've gotten involved in military conquests, and not conquests, but conflicts across the globe. Either it's the North Koreans, or it's the Middle Eastern countries, Libya, or Egypt, Syria, the threat with Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan. And so our military budget, we just keep spending money on these stupid countries. Makes no sense. And the Soviet Union understood this. Why do they want to stay in Afghanistan? It made no sense for them because it was a country that basically they were never going to conquer. The British never conquer it either. They never will. Because simply is that those people will fight, and quote unquote, they'll fight in the hills, in the caves, the mountains, and you're never going to beat them. Even if you got all kinds of modern weapons, you're not going to defeat them. You see. And so the United States has been there since what, 2001, 2? How many years is that? We're going on our 18, we're already 18 years now past. Maybe 19. They're still there. They're not there for conquest, although they're there for that, but they put in a certain power, someone, the figurehead, to deal with the drug trade. That's what it's all about. That's what this whole thing was about Vietnam. It's about the drugs. It had nothing to do with about setting people free. Now, the situation in Korea is different. I wouldn't say that. It's a different ballgame. But definitely Vietnam was about the drug deal. And so is Afghanistan. So it costs tremendous amount of money to support a military. You have to have a economy that can provide for this because you have to have industry building this stuff up. And let's not forget this, folks, and this is critical. You don't win wars in the past. You won war simply is because the United States really was never attacked in World War II. Yes, there was some attacks, such and such, but we're not talking about, soldiers landing on our beaches and all that kind of stuff and attacking. No. So the infrastructure here in the United States was intact. So the United States made tremendous amounts of war money because they were building armaments for the British, the French, the Russians, Soviet Union. I'm sure for everybody else, given patents, whatever, to build in other countries. We have that other countries in Eastern Europe, they were actually given patents. Australia was to fight in the Second World War. It's a different story now. It's a big different story, you see. The United States doesn't have the infrastructure it used to have. It's no longer the powerful industrial power that it was even in the 80s. Part of it was destroyed by Clinton's NAFTA deal, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which allowed industry now to build in Mexico at cheap labor, destroying jobs, destroying the tax base for the government, you see. And also, you see, there was less industry here. There's no such thing as free trade, folks, you see. It's free trade for the most powerful. They benefit, not for the small companies. And that's what happened. The grass you're seeing simply is the weaning of that being destroyed. There's no small companies. For example, I'll say this right here. There's a where I live at. There's some key things that go on here where I live at. There's a plant here. At one time I was talking with a friend about this yesterday. It's a company called FMC, and the FMC at one time here in Aiken was building some military components for the military. So they're part of the defense part of the defense industry. So what happened simply is they eventually are bought out by another company called United Defense. And eventually United Defense is building Bradley fighting armament vehicles for the Army. And most of that took place during the wars in the Gulf War, Gulf One and Gulf Two. So that company now is owned by a British company. Now, I have a little problem with that, folks, and I'll tell you why. When is it when the United States gives its if it's so vital for the defense, why we allow a British company to buy out American defense industry? Those are red flags in my opinion. And I don't agree. What's happened simply is the United States went rogue. Neocons were the power people. And the George Bush administration at first, fighting wars. It didn't stop. Not with the Clinton administration, it didn't. The war still continued. Then W got involved, and then we got involved with all kinds of wars again. And all we've done is destroy people's lives. That's all we've done. We destroyed people's lives in Iraq, people's lives in Syria, total destruction in Libya. It's none of our goddamn business at all in these countries, except for those who want to make money. Wars are beneficial for those who want to take over and steal people's oil, raw materials. You know, it's a little different when you were in the colonial days when the British and the French and the Germans and the Dutch, were involved. They just took pieces of parts of Africa and just took it over. So wars are caused just about all the time simply is. And they do this on purpose and say, these are the enemies here. They call it, hey, look over there. They're the ones that are causing, they're communists. They're so-and-so. They're such and such. And you believe them every goddamn time. They lie to you every fucking time and you believe them. You're so gullible. You actually go for all this shit. This whole thing with the situation in Ukraine. I'm surprised we are not at war with the Russians. I really am. But I don't think the Russians are meant to be involved in it. I think both sides are controlled. Obviously, the United States is, and I'm pretty sure the Russians are too. And that's not what they want. They don't want another so-called war. They want countries to fall apart. Because when they're in chaos, they're easy pickings for those who want to destroy them. And unfortunately, almost all these countries are dependent upon bankers. And even China itself is actually dependent in some ways. Yeah, China's a multi-international power. The other thing you got to ask yourself, how did China get so powerful? How did they get so powerful, folks? Because Henry Kissinger and the Most Favored Nations treaty that allowed China to get involved in that, the G8, G10, whatever it was. allow China to profit. And eventually American corporations said, hey, excuse me, why should we make Apple computers over here in America? Why should we make computers here at all? Let's make them over in China. They're cheap labor. We can spend it far less. All about money too, greed. So that technology is there, but the problem is simply is they give that technology to the Chinese. You see, part of it simply is that the Chinese were given patents in order for them to relocate to China. Basically, China said, "Hey, we work with you anywhere you want to. We'll do everything for you. We provide the labor, everything, building materials, whatever. But we want the patents." That's right. It's always a catch, isn't it? And so these industrialists do that. You see, because they don't care. They don't care. You see. So when I remember talking and arguing about this at my father's place of business and arguing with other people who didn't understand the bigger picture, was that when you give your technology away, you begin to become dependent upon other countries, and that's what we did. I talked with a gentleman who worked for General Electric. You know those huge generators they build, General Electric made for the dams and your power companies. That is these huge turbines. Not for the airplanes, but for them to move water and produce steam. We're still on steam, folks. Okay, with the hydroelectric plants. That was all General Electric. That was their patents. They just gave that technology away. They gave it away back in the early, I think the mid 90s. I'm sorry, not mid 90s. Take it back. Probably the late 90s gave it to China and early gave it to them. Here, we got a deal for you, such and such. Let's see. And the guy who used to work for him was appalled by that. I said, well, yeah, it's all about, the United States is no longer going to be the prime player in the future. We just got to destroy her. And that's what they're doing right before your eyes. So my advice simply is not for you to get depressed. My advice for you simply is you need to become as independent as possible as you can be. That's my advice. You need to be aware of who you're dealing with. We're not dealing with communists anymore, folks, because communists are not really the threat. They tell you this, but it's actually the ideologies of the communitarians that's the threat. And it's been growing and it continues to grow, and no one knows what's going on. And I'll tell you how it works in some ways simply is just by stealth. Just by stealth. And it's at what we call, it's not at the federal government level, it's not at the states level per se, hardly. It's at the city and county level. They made inroads, basically, what I call in small communities where people were hurting, supposedly what we call public and private partnerships, COGS, what they're called COGs, which are councils on a government. And part of the whole Agenda 21 is part of this whole thing. It goes together. And then also the issue of technocracy. All that goes together. The United States is being attacked because simply she's basically the last bastion left in the world. And we're being attacked on multiple levels everywhere. It's not it's not an airplane attack here. It's not an army attack. It's subversion within the gates, the Trojan horse. It's not an outside enemy. It's an enemy within the states, within the state itself. You see? And that's how most countries fall a lot of times. It's not actually always because of some foreign power. That happens, yes, but it has to be so rotten within that country in order for it to fall. And so that's what's happening. You can see it clearly. And that's why I scream and yell so much with this whole thing with communitarianism. Simply, this is what's going on. You need to understand what's going on. You need to understand your enemy. That's what's so critical. Most people don't understand who the enemy is. They're calling these people communists. Well, yeah, they're probably communists in some ways, but not totally communists. Most of these people are just young yuppies and rich people who've been educated and basically brainwashed that they need to usher in a new type of government because they think they're going to give and help everybody, and they're going to be a part of it. Wrong. They're not going to be a part of it. They're useful idiots. It's being used. Once they do their job, they're done away with. They're no longer be around. Communists do that. Capitalists do that too. So everybody's always saying we need to have capitalism, such and such. No, we need to get back to the land. We need to get back to the land so much. We need to actually be more agricultural in power and to forget about all these powers that want to use the United States to manipulate us. You see, we need to take care of ourselves. Well, it's a long video. Actually, I don't think I've ever done a video this long. It's an hour and 10 minutes, actually. So I wanted to, this is just a long, this is just simply explaining to you simply how these things have occurred. And I can go further back. I can go further back in our early history. We never were ever free neither, folks. Never were. We've been used the whole time. The United States has been used as a military power to eliminate countries that actually wanted to be free to what the United States wanted and to basically destroy that idea by us being involved with that. So they used the United States in a way as a tool, a battering ram, to eliminate other countries who wanted to have similar systems to our country and to be free. That's the sad part. This other part simply is the United States has gone in and simply just, when people were supposedly in power, were wanting to do that, they just simply eliminate those people or simply got somebody else to take over and eliminated that idea. You see. That's what the Arab Spring was all about. That's what the Orange Revolution was all about in Ukraine. All these things are done for a purpose, to steal from the people their own country, to destroy countries, to make people poorer and poorer. We have some really sick people in this world. We got some really sick ones who simply want to destroy life on this planet. I would say life on this planet, not life. I would say simply they want to destroy you to the point simply is that you have no hope. That's part of the whole deal. So, okay. Well, it's 5:30. Time for me to end. Hope that some of this, what I shared with you, would help you, enlighten you. I never got to Bonhoeffer or Martin Niemöller. I'm sorry about that. Well, I can share something about them. They're pivotal in basically not bringing Hitler down, but they're actually part of a plot to destroy Hitler. And Bonhoeffer is in charge of the confessing evangelical church in Germany. He is actually responsible for a small seminary that was in, I can pronounce this, Fickelwalker or something. I can't. Fickerwald in Germany. They met at a school there, a small seminary. They didn't go quietly in the night. Martin Niemöller was actually on the radio until the government shut the transmissions down. They wouldn't allow him to speak over the radio. Niemöller is the one who basically they came for the trade unions, they came for the communists, eventually they came for the Jewish, and then eventually they came for me, and there was no one here to protect me. That's somewhat of a summation of his speech. Niemöller was a pastor also. They didn't go along with the Catholics. did go along with the reformers, which is part of Germany, and it definitely did go along with the Lutherans. The Lutherans bought and drank everything that Hitler was a part of. So did the Catholics. Those are the two major denominations in Germany. The reformers are a smaller group, and the confessing evangelicals are tiny. They're not even, probably wasn't even 1% of the people, if it was even that. So they were a small group. And so what Bonhoeffer got in trouble for was just simply as he was helping people escape Germany. They found out about it. That's why they pursued him, and eventually they discovered that he was also involved in trying to destroy Hitler in the failed attempt to kill him at the bomb that went off that was being done in the eastern part of Germany. And there were people in the army that were involved because they knew it was a lost cause. They could see the handwriting on the wall. Eventually, Niemöller did not lose his life. He was thrown in prison, but Bonhoeffer did lose his life. He was hanged at a prison. In fact, as the United States was closing in, such and such, if I recall correctly, they moved him to another place in order to hang him for treason. So he never was discovered till he's dead. I don't know how, this is the key thing here. It's critical because most Christians are, and I'm not a Christian anymore. I was involved in this. I understood this. That's why I was involved. There's a video actually about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He came to America. And kind of changed his life. And then Karl Barth had an enormous impact upon him also, who's a Swedish theologian, as well as I recollect. And so he lost his life for this. Very few people know anything about this, but they were what I call cogs against the wheel, spokes against the wheel. They would put the wrench into the machine and say, we're no longer going to be a part of this anymore. Now, am I supporting that? No. I'm just pointing out the history of this. You have to decide what you're going to do. But I would say simply is that there are other elements that are going on now that are far deeper and different. There's a spiritual interest here that people need to understand that are not aware of. So it's a different ball game now compared to 60 to 70 years ago when it was a different ball, with the Second World War. I believe that the Third World War itself is a part of the destruction of all countries. That's what this is about, to destroy them from within, the attrition, and have people submit. That's what's part of their third war. So it actually is a different type of war, a lot to do with what I call fear-based, and to basically get the enemy to eventually that they will no longer basically stand up. They just simply will comply. That's my theory. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but that's my theory. Okay. Well, I wish you a good night, and you take care, and thank you for listening. Again, you're more than welcome to ask questions. I will try to answer them as best I can. So thank you again. Take care.